Hi, bird. How are you doing? How are you doing?
Hello.
Hi. Do you know where Jill lives? Where's Jill? See you later. Hi.
Oh, hey. Hi. Where's your bike?
Oh, just down there. It's okay.
You sure?
Yeah,
Okay, there.
it's fine. The parakeet will look over it.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. So in this photograph, need a bit of a palate cleanser in a way, just to kind of get my mind around this. Okay, so it's a photograph of what looks to be a restaurant and it could be actually a food stall in a wet market. The photograph is it's of a restaurant, and on the top there's like an ad for, could be a can of cane juice or beer, and then there are 4 photographs of bowls of soup. One of them is like a yellow broth, one is a red broth, so you're thinking a bit spicy. One of them is like a kind of a darker brown curry, and then another red one of, inside I can just make out frog legs and some chilies. And then, compositionally, it's nothing to talk about. Mm-hmm. But the content, I don't know. I don't read Chinese characters. I don't know what this is about. So why don't you walk us the who, what am I looking at?
You're looking at a restaurant in Guangzhou, in Guangdong province, where, as you say, those dishes are all on display for the public to see. But what you're also seeing when you're talking about the Chinese writing is that there are some symbols there that have been blocked out, if you can see in the middle there.
Okay.
And that's dog meat.
Okay, that one character is for dog.
Right, exactly. So that is a restaurant that has complied with the new regulations in China to stop selling dog and cat meat as food for the table. So it's a very symbolic picture.
Okay,
you know,
so that
we don't
one
need to
character.
see the we don't need to see the dog suffering or the cats being butchered, but that one picture is so profound that it shows a very good observation of China's livestock list, removing those species from the list this time last year.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the rest is just various
dishes. Yeah.
And this, so what
There's
it is.
no more dog.
So as you pointed out, under each photograph is like a byline, I guess, just sort of saying this is what it is. So this is like blah, blah, blah curry, and this is whatever. And then, as you say, somebody taped over the characters. So the characters are in yellow. And somebody taped over probably with yellow electrical tape or something. Just saying, well, it's soup, but it's got no dog in it.
Right.
Got it.
Right, exactly. And this is something, of course, that, you know, we celebrate now because it was another one of our founding goals of Animals Asia, to end dog and cat consumption in China. Wow. And I'm not sure that any of us believed that day would happen, but it sure did in May of last year.
Oh.
And, you know, I think the world, when they saw the headlines, they thought somehow that China had kowtowed to the West, you know, because of how we think about companion animals, and that we sometimes laugh about people in China. They eat everything with 4 legs except a table and everything with wings except an aeroplane. And it's a very bad and offensive joke.
Sure.
And it's not true.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, the Chinese government rose to this level of removing dogs and cats from the livestock list as a direct result from their comments of dogs helping society across the world and being good for humankind.
Sure.
So it was a real celebration at every, you know, level of that action. And, you know, we're going to see pushback from the industry. We're not going to see the industry ended overnight. We know that. But we do know that the holistic approach of the programs that Animals Asia has been running in China, actually since before Animals Asia was founded, you know, when I was first there in the mid-1980s, we know that those programs have led, you know, or helped the government to make that decision and help the general public, more importantly, perhaps, to accept that decision as well in the main.
Okay.
I mean, we all know there's an animal boom of dogs and cats in China. You know, people wanting to bring dogs and cats into their community as friends now. Today. We know that customs officials are using dogs all the time. We know that there's guide dogs for the blind in China. So there's a huge embracing, if you like, of dogs and cats in the community.
Is that what was missing all along?
You know, this is something that culturally we have to recognise, that people of my age have lived through tragedy in China. Do you know?
Yeah.
So with the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, how could you talk about loving animals when 40 million
Survival.
people were dying of starvation across the country?
Sure.
So, you know, this is something that dogs and cat owning was seen as bourgeois in the early days.
Yeah.
You really couldn't talk to your neighbours about taking dogs into your hearts or anything. But now it's a complete turnaround. You know, I remember being in China in the 80s when there was one animal welfare group that we supported before Animals Asia. And now there's about 250 or more animal welfare groups that are really passionate across the country. And it's these sort of programs that we're setting up, working with the local NGOs, improving shelters, bringing programs like Dr. Dog into hospitals and disabled centres, and Professor Paws into schools. That you had Karina, you know, our education director, she was talking about these programs.
Do you have those programs as well in China? Or those
absolutely, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, absolutely, we do, and they're embraced. And you know, people can't get enough of them.
Great ambassadors.
It's wonderful, and you know, there's even sort of, you know, scientific reserves in China talking about, you know, the beneficial effects of sharing our company with dogs and cats, that they're good for our immune system. They reduce our blood pressure levels, you know, and our cholesterol levels, etc., etc. So there's you know, China thrives on science and on paper. And that sort of thing is really important. And that's the sort of thing that we can work with them on to prove that a dog going into hospital is going to be good for a patient's physical and psychological health. There's no question.
Okay, let me shift tracks a little bit. We've got... I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. Don't be shy, don't be afraid of this word. You've got a certain mastery of this, not the subject, but of the practice of conservation, right? I know it's a funny thing to kind of accept. Don't take it as a label. Okay, so you have this fed from your experience, so that when you're faced with the crux or crisis or challenge, that mastery and that experience lets you look at the situation with a lot more information, so you can kind of see, for example, things are a lot more complex. You don't have the knee-jerk reaction, right? And so let's imagine somebody who is anywhere but Asia, who is having these... I grew up in Quebec, in Montreal and Quebec, right? The pretense is that, these really horrific things about animal cruelty happen in Asia like nowhere else. Wait a second. In Quebec, they're horrific puppy farms.
Absolutely.
Right? So in other words, how do we shift that focus to give either advice or knowledge or insights to somebody to say, okay, think about, as a conservationist, wherever you are, what is the mindset that you can sort of help them to kind of break outside of their bias or break outside of their...
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. And I mean, you're so right, man. You know, live animal markets, they've still got live animal markets in the US, you know, that they should be closing down yesterday, you know, because this sort of, obviously everything that the pandemics that we're seeing, every pandemic virtually that we've seen has been as a result of our unkindness to animals. So if the animal welfare is not compelling, surely the human welfare has got to be compelling, and that we are, you know, really destroying our species on this planet because of the egregious way that we're treating animals. So we've got to look at this in a different way and do things differently. There's no question about that. And you've only got to go, you know, look at all the freedom foods, if you like, that you see for sale in the supermarkets, all the ones with the green label, etc. And then remember all the exposés of the undercover, you know, when they go undercover into slaughterhouses, etc. Even those green meats that you're buying are still victims of horrible cruelty in those slaughterhouses, you know, because the exposés speak for themselves. It's why, you know, the US, for example, are trying to introduce or have introduced ag-gag laws, you know, gagging of those cameras, preventing cameras in those facilities so the general public can't actually see the reality of what happens. And I find that so distasteful and so offensive to the animals, you know, who these slaughterhouses contain.
For sure.
So yeah, I mean, we should have those cameras there for every, you know, as a moral template, if you like, to show how the animals are treated, or
Right.
to at least encourage better treatment, or indeed to encourage more people to become at least gradually plant-based, or as
And-
much as they can. This earth is not going to sustain
Sure.
the
Well-
level that we're eating meat today.
So there's this notion of I was talking about this with a friend, right? Like, so Robert Sapolsky, he's a neuroscientist who wrote the most incredible book. He has a whole chapter on this notion of how in our brains we have this immediate sort of reflex that is so fast of dividing things in terms of groups of us versus them. Okay, so let's say that us can be, you're in a room full of women,
Yeah.
and then a guy steps in. So the us, all of a sudden the guy comes in, there's your brain reacts so fast.
Yeah.
It's like faster
Yeah,
almost than
yeah,
your
yeah.
awareness, right? So we can have that us versus them in everything. And so us can be, Westerners versus Chinese. Oh yeah, the thems, those Chinese, what are they doing with the dogs, and what are they doing with it's so cruel and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, but wait a second, as you say, let's look in our backyard.
Absolutely.
Look at the social lives of chickens
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
cows or whatever. Yeah. There's a question. We'll get there. Don't worry, just hang in there. So, what's amazing to me is that you came here, you started partnering with this group, you started you continued your activation as a conservationist. Now, obviously, these seeds were sown inside you very young, very early on. What was that with you as a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old? Like, what kind of 10-year-old were you that came home with kittens and puppies?
Yeah, I wasn't really allowed to. My mum died when I was a baby. My father brought my sister and I up for a few years. We lived with an auntie and uncle. We never really were allowed to be around animals, even though my auntie tells me that when I was, a toddler, I would cross the road just to stroke a dog or a cat. So she had to keep me on reins. Otherwise, I was going to get splattered in the road. So
Reins is a leash.
leash. It's a leash. I had a leash. I did. And so it was inherent. I know that.
Yeah.
I know I loved animals before I could say the word animal.
Sure.
I absolutely know that.
Yeah.
Without a shadow of a doubt. I was the baby that threw dolls out of the pram but loved teddy bears.
Right.
I've got pictures of myself with teddy bears and
Nice.
stealing my
Nice.
sister's teddy bears.
Nice.
So I know that there was something inherent there, and
Nice.
which you can never explain.
So jump to 15 years old.
Yeah.
How did that manifest?
I started to work for a vet.
Okay.
I was allowed to go down to the local vet and after school and in school holidays, which I absolutely loved.
Yeah.
And I worked in a cattery in school
Okay.
holidays, cleaning out cat shit for, weeks on end
Uh-huh.
for nothing, for a pittance. And I wanted to be a vet nurse, or a vet actually.
Yeah.
And I flunked physics and chemistry at
Uh-huh.
school. So I knew that I was never going to be intelligent enough to be a vet. So that was very crushing.
Mm-hmm.
But I never lost my love of animals.
Right.
And so when I came to Hong Kong and met, this guy that represented an animal welfare group, I was just beside myself. And I just knew, this is my niche. This is what I want to do.
How old were you at the time?
Oh, I was in my about 25 when I
25.
came over to Hong Kong. Yeah.
Nice. Now, I'm like you, in which there is no division between companion animals, like domesticated pets, and wild animals. Although I don't project pet ownership on these animals.
Right.
In the same way, so how was your conservation expanded from companion animals to wild animals, and what can we give to the listener in terms of what they can do themselves to start getting involved, to expand from their homes where they may have a pet?
Right. Oh gosh, I think it's just again in our habits. What we eat, what we put on our face, what we read about, how we live our lives. My leap to conservation, if you like, from I originally I said to you, I investigated the live animal markets, and I was absolutely horrified to see bags and bags of dried animal parts, including bear paws, sacks of bear paws in those early days, and pangolin scales and tiger penises and even a rhino horn. I've got pictures in southern China.
Yeah, Guangzhou,
In Guangzhou,
yeah.
of course, everyone, Qingping Market was
Sure.
famous there for the most awful things. And And it was just then a wake-up call of thinking that this was all quack medicine, and realising very quickly when I was talking to Chinese medicine doctors that it wasn't quack medicine, that there's a real belief in these products and a belief in harmony with nature.
Right.
And that was where I think I sort of got a real education, because when they talk about harmony with nature, suddenly doctors were talking to me and saying bear farming isn't harmony with nature. It may be using their bile, but actually the way they're treated on the bear farms and the way their bile is extracted couldn't be far removed from traditional medicine.
Sure.
And how it should be, portrayed, if you like, and worked through. But they also gave me another surprise, that bear bile works in traditional medicine terms, and then I found out that it works in Western terms as well. So it contains ursodeoxycholic acid, or UDCA, which actually was then replicated in the 1950s, synthetically in a laboratory. And it was sold by the ton across the world, but it wasn't using bears.
Right.
And so knowing that, and then knowing from the Chinese doctors that, you could easily replace bear bile with herbs and with synthetics.
Yeah.
Then I knew that I could be brave and go out there in the community and start maybe, on programs that would reverse that cycle of cruelty for bears and show communities how incredible this species was in their own right, rather than how much they protect humankind or help humankind as well. So it was that leveraging, if you like, and that's what I think we can all do, in our day-to-day lives. Getting back to your, the crux of your question, I think, is just looking at the food we put in our mouths, looking at the medicine that we ingest, and just reflecting on is it kind?
Okay.
That's it. Yeah. Asking every day, what can I do to be kind?
Oh, wow.
Random acts of kindness as well really make you feel better as a person, and things that you don't get any reward for.
Sure.
Of course.
Well, there's a psychic reward of just being not being a douche, of being a nice person. Right. Jill, thank you so much. Look, we've sat for a long time now, and I really appreciate it. Can we make a photograph that will? We'll both be sweaty.
Okay.
I promise to make you look fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is so great.
Ran. Thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
So, is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So, if you like what you've seen, and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.